Hello and welcome to this overview of CoreStack Assessments, the CoreStack solution that streamlines and scales the cloud assessment process. CoreStack Assessments not only runs assessments against hyperscaler best practice frameworks, but also allows you to create custom assessment frameworks. CoreStack Assessments is the only platform to support multi-cloud well-architected assessments. Additionally, the solution accelerates multi-cloud best practice assessments with automation, provides a clear assessment workflow with comprehensive issue detection and recommendations for remediation, gives you the ability to handle high volumes of assessments for multiple clients with multi-tier workloads, tracks progress over time with continuous assessments and milestones. Let's get started with the demonstration.
The assessment framework tool comes out of the box with several different best practice frameworks: the AWS well-architected framework, the Azure well-architected framework, and the Google Cloud Architecture framework. Additionally, you can create custom frameworks by selecting the Custom Frameworks button and then selecting Create Custom Framework. We can give this a name. Optionally, add a description. We can select the cloud or clouds that will be applicable to this framework. We can add a logo for this particular framework. Finally, we'll upload the best practices, which will be in the form of a CSV file. And then we'll select Save, and that will create the custom framework. This custom framework, as you can see, is now available to be used within the assessment tool. To perform an assessment, the first step is creating a workload. To create a workload, you'll come to the Workloads page, and you'll select Create Workload. From here, we're going to give this workload a name, and we're going to give this a workload type. I'm going to select a workload owner, or I can just keep it to myself. Optionally add a description, and then I'm going to define the workload scope by tiers. So the first tier, I'll just call tier 1. We can again optionally add a description. We select the cloud provider that is applicable to this tier. We'll select one of these cloud accounts that will contain the resources. We'll go ahead and load the resources. And now that you can see a list of the resources that make up this workload, the idea here is that I would use these filters to filter down the list of resources until I have the list of resources that actually represents this workload. We'll go ahead and just assume for the moment that we've done that. Once we have added the filters that are necessary, we'll move on. We can actually add a tag that will define this workload. For instance, you could add a tag that says workload for the key, and then value XYZ, and any resource that has the workload equals XYZ tag will then be included in the workload. Additionally, we can add workload attachments, so any documentation that you might have for this workload, network diagrams, anything like that, that can all be added here as an attachment. We'll select Create Workload, and now you can see that the demo workload for video has been created. So the next step will be to create an assessment. And from here, you can see that the assessment name has already been populated based on the workload name. We can optionally add a description. We have the assessment owner. I could change this if I would like to. We have the assessment approver. I'm just going to go ahead and set myself to be the assessment approver. And then we have the workload name, which has already been populated for us. And then we're going to choose the framework or frameworks that we would like to assess this workload against. We'll go ahead and select the AWS well-architected framework, select OK. I have the option to sync this workload back to the AWS well-architected tool as well. And now I'm just going to go ahead and press Save, and then we'll show you how to get started with the assessment in the next section. To continue the assessment, from the Assessments page, under Actions, click Continue Assessment. This will bring you back into the assessment context, where you can view at the top the basic details about this assessment. You can see if the scan has been completed. You can re-trigger the scan. You can see the status of the scan, where we've had 114 successes, 13 issues, and 5 errors. We can add filters to the questions and best practices, and then we can see below the list of pillars across the top. We have cost optimization, operational excellence, performance efficiency, reliability, security, and sustainability. In the left-hand pane, we can see a listing of questions. Within each question, we have a series of best practices. At the top, we'll have the details about this question listed. We can set this question to applicable or non-applicable. If we set it to non-applicable, we need to include a reason why. We can see the risk, the overall risk to the organization if this question is in non-compliance. We have the status of open. We have the scan, whether this is complete or not. Again, we can re-trigger a scan. And then we have the policy status. We had 2 successful scans. I can change the owner of this question. I can change the assigner of the assignee of this question. For each question, I can read the details. I can tell from nature whether this is a manual or automated best practice. For manual best practices, I'll need to manually respond to this particular best practice. I'll need to add comments describing my response. I can add attachments that might be supporting documentation for whatever my response is. And then I can see a recommendation. This is a canned recommendation that comes from the framework, and you may need to adjust this based on the unique responses under these specific details. Again, for manual best practices, I'll need to also set the status. So I can either set this to verified or non-applicable. For any of these best practices that are automated, as you can see here with cost 1.6, monitor cost proactively, nature is automated, the risk is medium, the scan has been completed, and we have 2 successes. I can click on the success link and see which policies we're scanning based on this best practice. I can also see that the status has already been automatically set to verified for me. If I want to understand what issues were found during this scan, I can click up above here on the issues link, and this will allow me to drill in for each policy that was a part of this scan. I can see a listing of any resources that had violations within the assessment. From here, I can go, if I want to take a look at the assessment summary, I can click this back button and this will take me to the assessment summary. Here I can get a breakdown how I'm doing in this assessment. I can view this by best practice status. I can look at this by best practice risk. I can add filters here. I can look at this by question rather than best practice. Couple of different ways to visualize my status. As I scroll down, I can see I have an overall framework score. In this case, I have a lot of work to do. I only have a 19 out of 100. If I were to continue through and respond to some more of these best practices, this number is going to continue to go up based on my progress. As you can see below, for each pillar within this framework, I get a breakdown. I get an overall score, listing of the number of automated best practices and a listing of the number of manual best practices. Here I can choose to approve or abandon this assessment. And if I chose to approve that, that would create a milestone. Additionally, I can create a milestone by selecting the create milestone, and we'll say milestone 1. And we'll hit save. And that's just going to save this as a point in time that I'll be able to reference back to in the future to see how I'm doing over time. I can now export the assessment PDF report, which we'll go ahead and do that now. And then we'll download the report. We can open up the report and have a look. As you can see, this report has quite a few pages, so we're only going to go over a couple of the highlights. So we have the cover page, which gets you the basic information about the assessment report. We have the assessment summary, which gives you a breakdown of the total best practices by pillar, the number verified, a number of high-risk issues, medium-risk issues, low-risk issues, and any that are non-applicable. For each pillar and each question within the pillar, you'll have a breakdown of the best practices that make up that pillar and what the responses were, the recommendations, the nature, severity, and status. So as you can see, for each of these will be filled out based on the results. Second part of the report is the details with resources, and this is going to give you a breakdown for each best practice that had automation associated with it. It'll tell you any of the resources where there were violations for a given best practice. Scroll through this report and really truly understand how you've done in the context of this assessment.
We hope you found this demonstration helpful. If you have questions or feedback, please reach out.